Now, we've had from previous studies, we talked about Job, and we said this is one of the premises, that Satan can only do so much. And he can only do that from the permission of God. He can't do anything. He's got his hands tied. Only God will allow him to do anything. And we need to remember that. So let's read in James 5:11. It says this, behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. You know, it's interesting. Job, what's his name mean? It means he who weeps. I'm going to tell you something. That name given to that man was a prophecy. You know, you think about it. When he was born, he didn't cry forever, but his name means he who weeps. But you know, in the story of Job, his name suited him well. It turned out just exactly what he was going through in a sense. He who wept. Now, we hear these expressions all the time. We hear these who say, no pain, no gain. What goes around comes around. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And every cloud has a silver lining. You can probably think of dozens and more of it, of these sayings. So these expressions that we have heard reflect an inherent thinking in our culture. Now it says like this, we think about this way. We say A plus B needs to happen so that we get C. That seems logical. That sounds congruent, as they used to say in geometry. But the problem is that we apply this formula often to God, and when people around us are suffering, we find out that life doesn't work that way. We subconsciously place God in a box. You read the book of Job and his so-called friends, and I won't go through all of that, but some of them have him in a box, have Job in a box. Or have God in a box, and that's the way he works, and that's their theology. But we don't realize that sometimes God works outside the box. When we try to justify the pains of others in hopes of making that person maybe feel better, and we use cliches and we get smug and pat answers of things. We try to figure out what's wrong with that person, why they're going through what they're going through. We've heard opinions for others, and sometimes we pass that on. But we try to comfort them in their hour of need. But more often than not, it's really to make ourselves feel better. You know, you go to a funeral and you pity the person who died, but you look at yourself at that time. You pity poor old me. It's really feeling sorry for yourself, not the person who died. Somehow we think we can fix the problems, but we really don't know any rhyme or reason of why things happen as they do. We just don't know. People, we can sympathize with them. We can share our tears. You know, the Bible says in Romans, rejoice with them that do rejoice and weep with them that weep. But unlike Radio Shack that has the answers, we definitely don't have the answers when somebody is troubled. So in the meantime, they have to endure the suffering. Have the patience that everything is going to turn out all right. But we really don't know the whys of why it's all happening. You know, when you go through suffering, when we go through suffering, it's a very lonely place. Many of us just despair because we feel as if no one really understands our situation. And in the midst of this, these justifications, what I read at the beginning, are the last thing that people want to hear about. So what is patience? Well, it means putting up with things, waiting and accepting, letting things run their course, hearing without complaint. They said the New Bible Dictionary defines patience as God-given restraint in the face of opposition or oppression. But the kind of patient words that we hear from Job, patient, he's patient, the patience of Job, actually sound like this. He said, I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak, he said, in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And that's just a few of them. Many similar lines have spoken by Job when you get to the middle of the book. They are typical in their brutal honesty. The painful truth of the matter is that life can be incredibly hard at times. Life can be hard to digest. But the beautiful thing is that we're allowed to say, and we can talk to God as how we feel. There's nothing wrong with it. We can do it even especially to God. We don't have to go to people and say and complain so much. We can go to God, trusting that God understands. And one thing, God is not going anywhere. Wouldn't it be awful calling God, well, he's away right now, he's on vacation, and he'll get back with you. He'll, as the press secretary says, he's going to circle around. That's what he's going to do. He'll circle around. And Job endured a lot of attacks of the devil. That was his wife, his friends. Someone said this, never pray for patience. God will teach it to you. And you won't like it. That's true. You won't like it. There were some hard and bitter lessons that Job would have to endure. But what in real life is being patient? It's the power to wait for a hope for good, even when that good is your husband, who is late for dinner and all that food is cold. Patience is the power to wait for a hope for good when that good is your wife, which is never on time for anything. Patience is a power for that hope for a good when your teenage daughter has been lying on the floor with her feet up in the air and has been clutching the telephone or cell phone for endless hours. Patience is that power to wait for that hope for good when that order you placed in a restaurant has not arrived for 45 minutes. So many of our situations that we find in life take a lot of patience, because we don't know what their end will be. For example, we could say that women have patience when the pains and changes associated with 9 months of pregnancy result in the knowledge that the joy will come when the baby arrives. That's true. That patience and expecting a child, and when that all ends and having that child, the joy that's received. Or perhaps we might go closer to home. There are times when we are standing 15 people deep in a line at Walmart checkout. They've only got 1 or 2 registers working. Is your patience at work? Maybe it's when you sit in traffic. Traffic that will not let up. And what happens? Our moods drop. And our inclination is to hit that horn. And that inclination grows stronger minute by minute. It's a common theme when all is well. You don't need to patiently endure. Patience is only needed when there's a struggle either on its way or already upon us. There was this elderly lady. Now, I knew of this elderly lady, and I speak from experience. If I said who she was, you'd probably know who it is. But she talked about her struggles with patience and endurance and managed to get through the trials in a graceful way. Now, she was an older woman, and she said for most of her life, when things were unpleasant or difficult, she made sure that the people knew it. I want you to know, she would say, what trouble I'm going through. If she was going to suffer, she was going to let everyone know as loudly and boldly as she could that she wasn't happy. And what that meant was that was very frequent and consistent of something that she was complaining about. She was so annoyed sometimes, things that bothered her or causing some level of distress. But you know what? However, she said, but I stopped it as I grew much older. She says, I realized that no matter how much I complained or how much I made other people struggle and suffer by my complaining, I still had to endure through the trial. So why make it known? Job had this to say, so much. But you know what? Patience is a child of faith. Why, if Thomas Edison had not been a man of faith, he had been a man of perseverance and determination, we might still be working by gaslight, or at least it may have been many years before we found the electric light was even seen. It's been reported that Edison failed over 6,000 times before perfecting that first electric light bulb. On one occasion, a journalist challenged Edison, saying to him, Mr. Edison, why do you keep trying to make light by using electricity when you have failed so many times? Don't you know that gas lights are with us to stay? To this, Edison replied, young man, don't you realize that I have not failed because I have successfully discovered 6,000 ways that won't work. Edison finally succeeded in finding a filament that would work. And you know, while experimenting, the thought came to him, why not try a carbonized cotton fiber? And finally, he did succeed in that carbonized fiber. He placed it in a vacuum tube that was sealed. And he said, Eureka, if finally the light came on and it worked. We are not in the dark. May I reiterate, may I repeat myself, the patience we are talking about is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. As virtues go, patience is a quiet one. It's often exhibited behind closed doors, not on a public stage. A father telling a third bedtime story to his son. I like to hear another one, Dad. A dancer waiting for her injury to heal. Somebody that's really impatient, sometimes they will really grab the attention. Drivers honking in traffic. That's what grabs our attention. They grumbling customers in slow-moving lines. I knew a man, in fact, Brother Trotter knew him too. And he would get mad at times, something would happen, and that man, I'm getting on carnality, but he would blow up right then and there. And once he blew up, he was all right after that. He calmed down. But he reached a point where he had to blow up because he didn't have any patience. You know, if we had a movie about impatience, they probably wouldn't even show it. We see all these action movies and everything, but a movie on patience, no. You know, having patience is being able to walk calmly in the face of frustration or adversity. Frustration. And we need ourselves have to have the opportunity to try to practice it. Someone said this, patience is a virtue. Possess it if you can. Found seldom in a woman, never in a man. Wow, that's patience. There's a story told of the New England preacher, Philip Brooks. He wrote a lot of our Christmas carols. And Brooks was known for his calmness and poise. But his intimate friends, however, knew that he suffered moments of frustration and irritability. One day, a friend saw him pacing the floor like a caged lion. They asked him, "What's the trouble, Dr. Brooks?" "The trouble is," replied Brooks, "is that I am in a hurry, but God isn't." How many times we're in a hurry? We can't hardly wait on God. We can't have patience with God. God's working everything all out. If we have the patience just to endure what's going through us. In Job 3, starting at verse 1, it says this, "After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man child conceived. Let that day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it, Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. Verse 6, it says, and as for the night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. And he says this, why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept, then had I been at rest. Verse 20, wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and the life unto the bitter in soul, which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for hid treasures. For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the waters. For the thing which I greatly fear is coming upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come upon me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. Then in Job 4, verses 1 through 5, it says this, then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, if we essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Behold, thou hast instructions many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholdeth him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. For now it is come upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. Let me say this, Job was not a perpetual complainer. Now, Job's trials, man, they were not imaginary, they were real. He did not lose one child, but he lost all 10 of them. You know, that's a horrible thing, that a child would die before the father. To think of that. You lose your children before you die. It should be the other way around. Now it says that he lost a few, he didn't just lose a few thousand of a great fortune, but he lost everything that he possessed. Nor was his ills just mild and trivial. They were grievous and heavy. Why, it says from the top of his head to the bottom, to the sole of his foot, he was covered with corrupting sores. And he hurt. Think of this. It was just something to see, but he hurt in every part of his body. In one short term, I would say Job was miserable. Job had met a cruel and a terrible misfortune. Now, Job had evidently been sick for a long time. The days had turned into months and perhaps even years. Job is anguished. The heavens have turned into brass. And you know what Job thinks? He says, it seems that God has forgotten me. In desperation, Job asked here 3 questions of God. In verses 1 through 6 of the 3rd chapter, Job asked the first question. He says this, why didn't I die when I was born? It says that Job cursed the day that he was born. He goes further than that. He said, when you remember my birthday, paint that day black on your calendar. I don't want anyone to know that a man called Job ever lived. There is no blessing involved in my birth. Now there's a second question he asked. He asked in verses 11 through 13, Lord, if I had to live through my birth, why didn't I die afterward? Why didn't I die after I was born, after I became a baby? He tells God he could have fallen, he said, from his mother's lap. My mother could have fed me improperly. Then he says this, he says in verse 20 through 26, that third devastating question Job asked, Lord, if you did not let me die as a baby, why can't you let me die this minute? Job says, in a sense, I'm ready to go. What possible good can be done by a man like me? Here I am, I'm feverish, I'm in pain, I'm scraping my sores, I am penniless, and most of all, through all of this, I'm rather embarrassed. All that I had, now I have nothing. I'm embarrassed. I can't get any rest. I have outbursts of pain. He said to God, just kill me. He said, God, I am ready to die. We get older and our friends have passed away. In one sense, we don't have any comfort from our friends. If we look at heaven right now and we're ready to go, you might say this, you might say, I have more friends over there than I have here. It seems he might say, I'm a little homesick for heaven. Heaven's becoming more populated over there than here. He said, I just want to go. All this trouble, all this physical, I'm a physical wreck of a man. What's the use of living? When I think about real life, abundant life can be found in heaven. Now that is real living. We know people like that. Scripture says in Ecclesiastes 3:1, it says this, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. 1 Timothy 6:17 says, for we brought nothing into the world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. Hebrews 9:27. It's appointed once for a man once to die, but after that, the judgment. Here I got a picture of Stalin's reign. But you know what? Millions of farmers refused to cooperate with Stalin's orders and were shot or exiled as punishment. He was highly regarded in the Communist Party. Stalin's daughter described her father and described his death like this. my father died a difficult and terrible death. At what seemed the last moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and cast a glance over everyone in the room. It was a terrible glance, insane or perhaps angry, and full of fear of death. It was his deathbed scene. Not very good to have saw that. It would have been horrible to witness. For Stalin, you reap what you sow. But in Job's case, Job was ready and righteous to die. In chapter 4, the first of Job's friends speak. We call him Eliphaz. Eliphaz the eloquent. He was some kind of orator. Evidently, he must have been the oldest because he spoke first. His speech was as slick as oil and as smooth as silk. He says, I would like to have a word. And he said, Job, practice what you preach. You have been so skilled, he said of Job, in counseling others who have been sick and had problems. You've been able to help them in their difficulties. Now, Job, guess what? It's your turn. You have talked a good talk. But you know what? You have not put that advice in your life. Then he says just essentially, practice what you preach. In Job 4, 7, 11, it says, I remember, I pray thee, whoever perished, being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils are they consumed. You know, Eliphaz, his philosophy is held by many today. Job, I'm going to ask you a question, Job. Have you ever known a good man to suffer the way that you are suffering? Can you just name just one? You know, when we hear of some calamity that happens to somebody, you know, by our facts, we immediately conclude that somebody is being punished. You know, if China had been struck with a terrible earthquake, some would say immediately, God is punishing them. Years ago, a particular magazine alleged an article that Billy Graham was ill because he had associated with the wrong kind of people. In the next month edition, it was reported that the editor of that same magazine had fallen down a flight of stairs. He'd broke his leg. The editor complained that Satan was attacking his God-given ministry. You know what? That draws out a very particular conclusion. If something happens to you, I may assume that the judgment of God is upon you. I look at you. But if something happens to me, I may have to make another excuse. Works both ways, doesn't it? You remember the words we sung, "It is well with my soul." You know, Horatio Spafford wrote that. You know the story. The family, as you know, lost their children when the wife was on her way. I think she's on her way from England to America. And there was a storm, and the children drowned. And the wife ended up sending a telegram to her husband. There were 2 words on that telegram: saved alone. In other words, I'm the only one left. In order to get his wife, he got on a ship and went over to pick her up, and on the way got to the place where the drownings happened. And so the story goes. But what is not well known about him is this. When he got back home with his wife, having lost his daughters, he was the pastor of a church in Illinois. And the board of elders of that church called a meeting and asked him to leave as their pastor. You know why? Because he had suffered such a great tragedy. He must have done something terrible that they didn't know about. And they fired him as their pastor. They thought because he suffered, he must have done something outstanding wrong. You know what? And you think that you have a tough time. What happened to him? Job 4, 5, and 6 says, but now it is come upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? Here's what was being said. Eliphaz says to Job, you are a hypocrite. You are a liar and a fraud. And Eliphaz says, you know what? Probably with a little laugh, I suspected it all the time. Finally, he told Job, you're probably getting what you deserve. You've told everyone else what to do, but now that trouble has come upon you. Now, let me tell you something. The hounds of hell may snarl, and they may snap, and they may bark, but they are not loose. Praise the Lord. The omnipotent collar of restraint is on them, and the chain is held in the hands of God. These things that overwhelm us and that sweep us away. Satan, he snows us down and plows us asunder. These things are always in the permissive will of God. And remember this, God rules, and God directs, and God knows, and God sees. God knows and he understands all your problems. There was a story of a little crippled boy. This is way back, and they said the streetcar, well, they still have them in San Francisco. I saw them. The streetcar was just about to pull on down, and the motorman heard a little child's voice holler, wait up, Mr. Conductor. Wait up for me. Wait. So he opened the door of his streetcar and waited, and soon in climbed this little crippled boy and spoke to the conductor and thanked him so sincerely and put the little coin in the box and went back and sat down by a man. And the little fellow with the crippled feet was so happy and so bright that the man he was sitting next to especially noticed him. And he said to the little boy very openly and bluntly, he said, you seem so happy. And you seem so bright. And yet you are crippled. How is it that you are in that way? When the little boy replied, he said, well, mister, my daddy tells me that God always gives us what is best. And my daddy says that God felt that what was best for me was to have my crippled feet. And the little boy added, and should I not be happy with what is best? James 5:7 says this, be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waited for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Again, we might ask how long is Job's patience? It's described as he waits through the former and the latter rain. We talk about Israel. The rain in Israel, it comes twice. You plant in the fall, and the rain comes in the season of planting, and probably in about October, November. That's the early rain. And then you get sporadic rain through December and January, and sometimes into March. But then the latter rain comes in March and April, right before the harvest. Now, it's saying about, James is talking about this. He says that is, and we understand that is no parable, that is no allegory. When a farmer plants his crops, he has to wait. He has to have patience in order to grow his crops. Now I'm going to try to finish up here. There are 4 bygone conclusions that we deal with when we deal with Job's patience. Number 1, patience is not an escape hatch. Job's patience gave him no escape from his pain. Job had lost his wealth, he had lost his family, and he was suffering unimaginable physical pain. God does not guarantee an easy road for his children. But instead, he promises that the testing will produce patient endurance. Number 2, patience does not guarantee an easy understanding of God's ways. As I read in Job, I do not hear him calmly say, okay, God, I know that your way is best. Job didn't do that. Job complained and everything, but it says he might have complained, but he did not charge God foolishly. He didn't do that. No. His patient endurance is accomplished. And it's accomplished by what? Because he had probably screams of agony. And his physical suffering, mind you, is much worse because he can understand what God is doing. After a lifetime of intimate fellowship with God, Job suddenly found that what God was doing no longer made any sense to him. The greatest hurt that can happen to a child of God is disappointment by what God seems to be doing. We don't know what he's doing. Biblical patience is not saying, praise the Lord, when you hit your thumb with a hammer. Now, do you do that? You say, ouch. Some people said worse than that, but when they hit their thumb with a hammer. When you fully surrender to God, pain still hurts. Job's perseverance did not bring immediate understanding, but he refused to give up on God. Number 3, patience is rooted in trust. Job exhibited biblical patience when he determined to trust God even though he didn't understand what God was doing. Job said this, though he slay me, I will hope in him. Biblical patience is rooted in our understanding of God's ways, but most important of all, but in our trust in God's goodness. What was the answer to Job's struggles? He trusted God. In Job 28:28, it says, and to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Job didn't know that answer. But he knew where the answers were found. And they were found with God. And fourthly, patience with God will give me patience with people. I've had going on right now people that seemingly just almost worry you to death. They're always complaining, always wanting you to do something in particular maybe. You don't know what to do. You can only do so much. My goodness, we've got so much on our plate, on my plate right now. But patience with people grows out of a patient faithfulness in our walk with God. After the first speeches of Eliphaz, and we didn't talk about Bildad, and we didn't talk about Zophar, and Job could have said to them that came around, get out of here. I don't want to see you. Just get out of here. That would have been the impatience of Job, but it wasn't. Thing about it is, yes, Job got frustrated with those, you might say, worthless physicians. Job argued with them. Perhaps he did even insulted them. But the thing about it is, he endured their speeches. And at the end of the book, and I'm going to the end of the book, Job did, intercede for them. How does he do that? He prays for them. It says in 42:10, and the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends also. You know what he did? He prayed for them before his situation had even been resolved. The Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Oh, he's not going to get the same family. There's going to be a lot of things that are different. Job at one time was still covered with boils. He was still childless. He was still penniless. And he had no reason to believe his condition would improve. But here it was, patient endurance with God had given him patience with people. How could I have patience with difficult people in my life? And Job recognized a fact in all this. He said that God uses difficult people to shape him in God's image. Somebody wrote this in conclusion: every stage of life involves some form of waiting and patience. When our children are tiny, we wait years for a good night's sleep. When our children are toddlers, we wait eagerly for the time when they will no longer wear diapers, can take a bath on their own, and get dressed by themselves. And when our children are teenagers and driving, we wait anxiously until we hear the front door close and know that they are safely home. When we grow old, we anxiously await the day we wait so many times for our adult children to phone us. Will they call us? At any stage of life, we wait for the results of medical tests. You know, waiting, having patience, is an enormous challenge. Like I say, waiting equals patience. This morning, no doubt the operators of heaven, heaven's prayer center, are overwhelmed this Sunday morning with calls for help. They are. Teach us how to wait when the unknowns exceed the knowns. When the questions exceed our answers. When our answers may not be enough. And when our resources may not be adequate. Strengthen us, Lord, by the journey ahead. Through the day's fog of uncertainty, through nights that darken the soul, through valleys shrouded by death shadows, through perilous moments and daily tests, through nagging doubts and haunting fears. When God does not seem to answer us right away, when the earth is not changed by what we do. Hey, let me tell you something. Don't give up. I'm going to tell you something else to do. And instead of don't give up, you just have to take courage. Don't let your hands be weak. For one of these days, your work will be rewarded. Don't give up when you feel your weakness and weariness from the long battles. Don't give up when your longed for and asked for prayers have not yet been answered. Don't give up when the devil's fiery darts of doubt find flesh and make you waver. Don't give up when multiple pressures seem to be unending. Don't give up when your labor and you wonder how much it can even matter, if it's even worth it. You're to look to Jesus. Fight, it says, the good fight of faith. It says to finish your race. And when you have done the will of God, you will see what is promised, his great and eternal reward. You know, we measure that by eternity, the hardships of this life will not be long. His grace will be given to you in your time of need. And it will be sufficient for you, even at the very worst times. My advice to you, don't give up. Just don't give up. Too many people in this day are giving up so easily. But don't give up. Continue in the faith. God promises that he understands. He has not left. He'll hear, and he does answer prayer. But just don't give up.